I was exactly 3 days out of spinal surgery when my daughter Claire decided my house belonged to her. The medication was making the ceiling fan blur, and a dull, throbbing ache wrapped around my lower back like a tight iron belt. I had spent months planning this recovery, arranging the main floor so I wouldn't have to navigate stairs. My doctor's instructions were clear: absolute rest, no lifting, no stress. Late Friday evening, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Claire. I answered, expecting a check-in. Instead, she skipped the pleasantries entirely. "David and I are heading up tomorrow morning," she announced, the background noise of her car rushing through the speaker. "We're using your house for our 3-day beach trip. His parents are coming too. The weather is going to be perfect." She didn't ask how my incision felt. She didn't ask if I was capable of hosting 4 adults and their luggage. She spoke with the breezy authority of someone who had already made the decision and was simply informing the staff of her arrival. "Claire." I replied, my voice steady despite the spike of pain as I shifted. "I just had spinal surgery. I can barely stand long enough to heat up soup. You cannot come here." "Oh, Mom, relax," she scoffed. "We won't bother you. You just stay in your room. We need the space for David's parents. We're already packed." For years, I had compromised. I had allowed Claire to treat my home like a free vacation rental because I didn't want the headache of her tantrums. But lying in that bed, feeling the stitches pull in my back, something fundamentally shifted. I wasn't just tired. I was done. "No," I stated clearly. "The house is not available." "We're coming anyway," she snapped. "Stop being dramatic." She hung up. I stared at the black screen. My silence had always been her permission. But not today. I realized my silence wouldn't work. I picked up my phone to make a different call. I didn't waste time crying or calling her back to argue. Arguments with Claire were a hamster wheel of guilt and manipulation, and I simply didn't have the physical energy for it. Instead, I looked at the spare set of keys hanging on the hook by the kitchen door. Claire had a copy. She had possessed one for 5 years, treating it as an all-access pass to my refrigerator, my laundry room, and my quiet weekends. I scrolled through my contacts and found Hank. Hank was a retired contractor who lived 2 doors down. He was a man of few words, thick shoulders, and an unwavering respect for personal property. Over the years, I had baked pies for his family, and he had patched my roof. We understood each other. I called him and explained the situation in 3 brief sentences. I needed the front and back locks changed immediately. I offered to pay double his usual rate for the late-night inconvenience. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Melinda," he grunted. "Keep your money." While I waited, I opened my laptop. The beach club passes. My neighborhood had a private beach access point, and as a resident, I paid a hefty annual fee for 4 guest lanyards. Claire loved flaunting those lanyards to David's family. I logged into the community portal, found the guest registry, and clicked deactivate on all 4 passes. Hank arrived with a heavy toolbox and a quiet nod. He went straight to work. The metallic click and scrape of the old deadbolts coming out felt incredibly satisfying. For the first time in a long while, I was actively protecting my peace. "I'll take the old hardware," Hank said, wiping his hands on a rag when he finished. "I also disabled the garage keypad. She won't get in that way." "Thank you, Hank." I smiled, leaning heavily on my walker. I might have guests tomorrow who won't take no for an answer. "I'll be working on my front lawn tomorrow morning." He noted, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Just in case." I watched the old deadbolt come out, knowing the real test was yet to arrive. Saturday morning broke with bright, unforgiving sunlight. I was propped up in my bed, an ice pack pressed against my lower back, watching the live feed from my driveway security camera on my tablet. At exactly 9:15 a.m., a heavy black SUV pulled in, crunching loudly against the gravel. Claire hopped out of the passenger side wearing oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat. David emerged from the driver's seat, stretching his arms while his parents Susan and Richard climbed out of the back. They began pulling out rolling suitcases, a cooler beach chairs, and a massive canvas tote bag. They looked entirely prepared for a luxury weekend, completely ignoring the fact that a woman recovering from major surgery was resting just a few feet away. I watched Claire confidently march up the wooden steps to my front porch. She didn't bother knocking. She reached into her designer purse, pulled out the silver key, and jammed it into the lock. She turned it. Nothing happened. She jiggled the handle, frowned, and pulled the key out to inspect it. She tried again, putting her shoulder into the door. The heavy oak didn't budge a millimeter. David walked up the steps, carrying the heavy cooler. "What's the holdup?" he complained, setting the cooler down with a thud. "The lock is stuck," Claire muttered, her face flushing pink. That was when a shadow fell over the porch. Hank stepped into the frame of the camera. He was holding a large steel wrench, casually tapping it against his thigh. He had walked over from his yard the moment he saw their car. "Lock's not stuck," Hank stated calmly, his deep voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "It's changed. Melinda is resting." Claire spun around, her confident smile vanishing the moment the spare key wouldn't turn. I pressed the small microphone icon on my tablet screen. My voice echoed out through the speaker above the door, crisp and loud. "Hank is right, Claire," I said. "You were told last night that the house is not available." David's parents exchanged confused glances at the bottom of the steps. Susan tightened her grip on her beach bag. David, puffing out his chest, stepped closer to the camera. "Melinda, come on. We drove 2 hours. My parents are here. You can't just lock us out. We brought our own groceries. We won't even be in your way." "I'm not opening the door, David," I answered, keeping my tone entirely flat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sound angry. I sounded like a bank teller declining an invalid check. "I am recovering from spinal surgery. I cannot have 4 people turning my home into a hotel." Claire pushed past her husband, her face now red with embarrassment and anger. She looked down at Susan and Richard, then back up at the camera. "Mom, you're embarrassing me," she hissed. "Open the door right now. We planned this weeks ago." "You planned it," I corrected her. "You never asked. When I told you no, you decided to come anyway. The locks are new. The garage code is erased." "This is ridiculous," Claire shouted, slamming her hand against the door frame. "It's my childhood home. You can't just shut family out because you're in a bad mood." "It is my house, Claire, and my recovery." Hank took a half step forward. He didn't raise the wrench, but his presence was a heavy, immovable block. "You heard her," he said quietly. "Time to pack it back up." David looked at Hank, sizing him up, but quickly realized he didn't want to mess with a man whose forearms were the size of tree branches. Instead, David grabbed the cooler and stomped down the steps. "Fine," David spat. "We don't need to sleep here. We'll just drop our bags in the backyard and head to the beach club. We'll find a hotel later." But they didn't know I had already canceled the one thing making this trip possible. David marched toward the wooden side gate that led to my backyard and the outdoor shower. He reached over the top to unlatch it, but his hand hit solid metal. I had asked Hank to put a heavy-duty padlock on the latch that morning. David yanked on the gate violently. "Are you kidding me?" "A padlock!" Susan, David's mother, finally spoke up. She looked deeply uncomfortable standing in the driveway with her rolling suitcase in the hot sun. "Claire, dear, you said your mother was happy to host us. You said she was looking forward to the company." Claire stuttered, adjusting her sunglasses nervously. She was. It's the medication. The pain pills are making her paranoid and difficult." I pressed the intercom button again. "I am perfectly lucid, Susan." Claire was explicitly told last night that I could not host, and she chose to bring you anyway. Susan's lips thinned into a tight line. She looked at Claire, and I could see the exact moment her opinion of her daughter-in-law plummeted. Well, let's just go to the beach, David interrupted, trying to salvage his pride. We have the club passes. We'll spend the day at the cabana and figure out the hotel later. Mom, Dad, leave the bags in the car. He pulled his phone out confidently, opening the neighborhood club app. The app required a digital barcode linked to the homeowner's account for entry. I watched him tap the screen. Then he tapped it again. His brow furrowed. Claire, your login isn't working, David muttered aggressively, swiping on his screen. Claire pulled out her own phone. Let me check. I sat back against my pillows, feeling a sharp twinge in my back, but smiling despite it. I watched Claire's face drop as she read the notification on her screen. The passes, she whispered. They're disabled. David spun around, glaring at the camera. You canceled the beach passes. We promised my parents the private cabana. I pay for those passes, David, I replied calmly. They are for my invited guests. You are not invited guests. Claire's phone buzzed, and the reality of the situation finally hit her screen. My phone vibrated on the mattress. A barrage of text messages from Claire flooded the screen. You are ruining our weekend. How could you do this to David's parents? They think you're crazy. Turn the passes back on right now. I am your daughter. I didn't type a single word in response. I opened the settings and put her contact on Do Not Disturb. Engaging with her panic would only feed her sense of entitlement. I was cutting off the oxygen to the fire. Outside, the situation was deteriorating for them. The summer heat was rising, and David's parents were still standing on the gravel, sweating in their resort wear. I don't understand, Richard, David's father, said loudly, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. Why would you drag us 2 hours out here if you didn't actually have permission to use the house or the beach? She's just trying to control me, Claire cried out, pointing at the camera. She always does this. She wants to humiliate us. The only one humiliating you is yourself, Claire, I said softly into the intercom. I didn't care if she heard it or not. David, feeling his masculinity challenged in front of his parents, and my silent observing neighbor, lost his temper. He looked around the yard, his eyes landing on the large bay window that led to my living room. The screen was old, and the latch was notoriously flimsy. Screw this, David growled, dropping the beach bag. Our stuff is inside from last time. We left our good folding chairs in the garage. If she won't open the door, I'm getting our property. He marched toward the flower bed beneath the window. He grabbed the edge of the screen and yanked. The ancient mesh tore slightly. Hank stepped off the porch. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten to call anyone. He just walked up directly behind David and cleared his throat. That was when David decided to take matters into his own hands. David turned around, puffing out his chest to meet Hank's gaze. Hank was at least 10 years older, but he had spent his life framing houses and carrying lumber. He stood perfectly balanced, holding the heavy wrench down by his side. Step away from the window, son. Hank instructed, his voice low and gravelly. I'm getting my chairs out of the garage, David snapped. This is my mother-in-law's house. You have no business here. Your mother-in-law asked me to secure her property, Hank replied. If you try to force that window, you're breaking into a house. I won't let you do that. Are you threatening me? David demanded, trying to sound tough. I'm giving you a boundary, Hank said plainly. You can walk back to your car, or you can keep making a fool of yourself in front of your parents. Your choice. David hesitated. He looked back at Susan and Richard. They were not looking at Hank with outrage. They were staring at David with sheer embarrassment. The neighborhood was quiet, but a few doors down, another neighbor had paused their lawnmower to watch the commotion. I pressed the intercom. David, your chairs are in the trash. I threw them out 3 weeks ago because they were rusted and ruining the garage floor. There is nothing of yours in my home. Leave my property. David's mouth fell open. He had no excuse left, no property to claim, no beach to visit, and no shelter to command. Susan grabbed her rolling suitcase handle and yanked it up with a loud click. Richard, get in the car, she said firmly. Claire rushed over to her mother-in-law. Susan, wait please. We can just go to the public beach. We'll find a nice restaurant for lunch. It'll be fine. Claire had told them I was away on vacation, a lie that was about to blow up in her face. Vacation. Susan asked, her voice dripping with ice. You told me on Thursday that your mother was in Florida for a month and we had the whole place to ourselves. Claire froze. She had forgotten her own web of stories. I had Susan's number saved in my phone from a holiday dinner 2 years ago. I picked up my tablet, created a group text with Claire, David, Susan, and Richard, and attached a photo I had taken of my hospital bracelet and surgical incision dressing just 2 days prior. I typed a single message: I am recovering from spinal fusion surgery. Claire was informed. I did not invite guests. I am sorry your weekend was disrupted, but I must rest now. I hit send. A moment later, 4 phones chimed simultaneously in the driveway. I watched the camera feed. Susan pulled her phone from her purse. She adjusted her reading glasses and looked at the screen. Richard leaned over her shoulder to read it. Spinal fusion. Susan repeated, her tone flat and utterly disgusted. She looked up at Claire, who was now staring at the ground, chewing her bottom lip. Your mother had her spine operated on 3 days ago, and you brought us here to party. She's exaggerating. Claire deflected defensively. It was just a minor procedure. She walks fine. I saw the walker through the window. Hank interjected helpfully from the porch. Richard shook his head slowly. David, load the bags. Susan and I are going home. Dad, come on. We're already here. David pleaded, sounding like a petulant teenager rather than a grown man. We can just book the Marriott downtown. I am not spending a weekend with a son who treats his family like a free hotel and a daughter-in-law who lies to my face, Richard stated firmly. Load the bags. The silence in the driveway was deafening as David's mother read the message aloud. Claire stood in the middle of my driveway, looking completely lost. Her grand weekend, designed to impress her in-laws and assert dominance over my space, had collapsed into total humiliation. She looked up at the security camera. I knew she couldn't see me, but she knew I was watching. Are you happy now? She yelled, tears of frustration finally spilling over her sunglasses. You ruined everything. You chased away my family. I reached for the microphone one last time. I protected myself, Claire. You ruined your own weekend the moment you decided my boundaries were a joke. Have a safe drive home. I released the button and turned off the camera feed. I didn't need to watch them leave. The sound of the heavy SUV doors slamming shut, followed by the crunch of tires backing out onto the asphalt, was all the confirmation I needed. Outside, Hank waited until their vehicle turned the corner before he finally walked off my porch. He texted me a few seconds later, "Coast is clear. Locks holding strong. Let me know if you need anything from the store." I replied, "Thank you, Hank. I'm going to sleep." I lay back down against my pillows. My back was throbbing fiercely from the stress and the sitting up, but mentally, I felt lighter than I had in a decade. There was no chaotic argument in my kitchen. There were no sandy shoes tracking dirt across my hardwood floors. There was no passive-aggressive complaining about the Wi-Fi speed. There was only the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the peaceful solitude of a home that belonged entirely to me. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since the surgery, I fell into a deep, uninterrupted sleep. I watched their car finally back out of the driveway, taking years of entitlement with it. 6 weeks passed. My recovery progressed wonderfully. The staples were removed from my back, and I graduated from the walker to a simple cane. I started taking short walks down the street, enjoying the crisp ocean breeze. Hank and his wife came over for a quiet dinner one evening, and we never spoke of the incident in the driveway. We didn't need to. Claire didn't call for the first 3 weeks. When she finally did, she tried to use the classic rug-sweeping technique. "Hey, Mom," she said breezily, as if the driveway disaster had never happened. "David's car needs new brakes, and we are a little short this month. I was wondering if you could transfer a few hundred to my account just as a loan." In the past, I would have sighed, complained briefly, and transferred the money to keep the peace. I would have told myself it was what mothers do. But I was not the same woman who had answered the phone 6 weeks ago. "No, Claire," I replied calmly. "I won't be doing that." There was a long pause on the line. "Mom, seriously? You're still mad about the beach trip? We said we were sorry." "You didn't apologize, actually," I pointed out. But this isn't about being mad. I am simply no longer funding your expenses or offering my home as a resort. You and David will need to figure out your own finances." "This is ridiculous. You're cutting us off over a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a boundary," I said. "And it's permanent." I hung up before she could start crying or yelling. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel cruel. I felt incredibly, profoundly free. Later that afternoon, I walked out to my front porch. I checked the heavy deadbolt Hank had installed. It was solid brass gleaming in the late afternoon sun. My house was quiet. My finances were secure. My peace was intact. Sometimes people accuse you of being difficult when you finally stop being easy to use. I didn't need lawyers or dramatic arguments to win my life back. I just needed a new lock, a firm word, and the courage to close the door.